When I was a child, I was sexually abused by my step-granddad for over a year and a half. He would get me to sit on his lap whilst we were watching TV, and he would have his hand down my pants, and he would be playing with me. He might push his erection up against me. He might stroke my face. He might breathe into my ear. If I was to look up at him, shh, he would give me that sign. And sometimes he would do it when people were in the room. Sometimes he would do it when people weren't in the room. And it was actually on one of the occasions where people were in the room, my stepmom, where she caught it happening. She brought me out of the room. She took me home and she told my dad. And my dad questioned me. I told him about what happened. And my dad said, right, you're not going around there anymore. And I want you to keep a lid on it. Don't go tell people at school. Don't go tell your friends. Don't go tell whatever members of the family. Keep it here within the family, right? We don't want a black cloud over the family name. So I was like, okay. Because 16 years ago, when I was a 10-year-old child, sexual abuse wasn't a thing on the news, right? It wasn't in the newspaper. It wasn't a conversational topic. So I had no idea what sexual abuse was. And what was happening between me and my step-granddad, I just thought that it was a form of love that he was giving me that simply no other member of the family was giving me. So I was okay with just not really thinking about it because I lacked the emotional awareness and maturity to know the actual weight of what was going on. So going throughout school, I was okay. However, I was the identity of the boy who was abused by his step-granddad. So I wasn't good with the women, right? I was a virgin. I wasn't good with making friends with guys. I was very introverted and I just wasn't confident. Now, that did change when we moved out of London. We moved to Bracknell in Berkshire. And I remember when we moved into this new location, I was thinking to myself, I was like, I'm going to create a new character. Now, I'm an actor, so I was probably enjoying it, right? The idea of creating this character. But I was like, I'm going to create Perry Power 2.0. I'm going to go to this new college and I'm going to be the guy who slept with loads of girls. He's super confident. He's extroverted. He's the life of the party, right? And he just doesn't care about anything. And I went to this new college and I became that person. And I faked it until I made it. And that actually became the reality. And I got a girlfriend at the time. We then went traveling. And then we came back and then we moved into a house together. And it was actually at that point that Lewis Howes brings out a book called Mask of Masculinity. And he talks about the mask that us men wear to hide our true and authentic selves. And that's when it clicked, right? He articulated it in a way where it made me realize that it wasn't necessarily a character that I was creating. Using his terminology, it was masks that I was wearing to hide that part of me. So people couldn't see it. And more importantly, the more masks that I wear, the more that I would not have to face that part of my story, right? And then that's when the inner dialogue grew. That's when the inner demons formed. And it was like, Perry, it went on for a year and a half, right? You must have enjoyed it, right? You can't go out and tell people about the abuse because they're going to laugh at you. They're going to outcast you. They're going to say that what happened to you didn't actually happen, that you're lying to get attention, right? So I was living with that. And I was like, but I was a couple of years into personal development and I was like, you know what? I am not my thoughts, right? I'm not my thoughts. I'm just going to, when my girlfriend comes home, I'm going to tell her what's happened. I know she's going to walk away from me, because I'm a fraud, right? And who wants to be with somebody who's abused? But I don't care. I just need to break my silence because I'm tired of living in that silence. So she comes home and I tell her about what happened. And much to my amazement, she welcomed me with open arms, right? And it made me realize that this external world that I've been viewing was literally just a reflection of my internal world, right? Because in my internal world, everybody was going to outcast me. I was prepared for her to walk away. But when I told her, she literally made me realize that this external world is actually a beautiful place with beautiful people in it, right? And then from there, I then shared my story again. And then I put it onto video. And I put my video out there for everybody to see. Every Tom, Dick, because I was like, I don't want to be calling up every Tom, Dick, and Harry, telling them about what happened. I want to put it on video, get out there so everybody can see it. Now, what's crazy is that just before that video, my dad told me to watch a film. And his film is called Spotlight. Now, for anybody who hasn't seen Spotlight, Spotlight is a fantastic film, right? It came out in 2015. Spotlight is about these team of journalists in Boston in 2001 who get whiff of a case of priests molesting children in the Catholic Church system. And it's this huge cover up. And the movie is about them uncovering this and shining a big spotlight on what was actually going in the Catholic Church system. And my dad tells me to watch Spotlight. So I watch Spotlight. And then I go to him and goes, have you seen it? I said, yeah. And he goes, well, you know, at the end of the film, before the credits come up, there's a list of Catholic churches and orphanages around the world that have had reported cases of child molestation. I said, yeah. And he goes, well, that's where your step-granddad grew up. And I was like, what? He goes, where your step-granddad grew up in Ireland, he went to a Catholic orphanage that had reported cases of the priests molesting their children there. And it was just this huge bombshell that he just dropped on me. And then my reaction was like, that makes sense why he done it. That makes sense. And when I said that, it felt like I attacked my dad. He got angry. He left the car, slammed the car door shut. Now, here's the thing about my dad. He's a beautiful man. Lovely, lovely human being. But he had inner demons. He really did. In 2014, he started to drink. And the drinking on the weekend became drinking during the week. Drinking at home became drinking in the car. And then his blood pressure went through the roof. January 2017, he became a diabetic. 5 months later, he dropped dead from a heart attack. And he was 48 years old, right? He was 48 years old. And for about 6 or 7 months after that, I went through a grieving process. I was a wreck. He was my best friend, and I was a complete wreck. But I believe that his death serves a purpose as to why I'm giving this talk today. Because when I released that video about me talking about this sexual abuse, I go around to a family member's house. And his family member, who just watched the video, she said to me, Perry, you know, you weren't the only one who was sexually abused by that guy, by your step-granddad. I said, who else? She goes, me, your cousin, and also your dad. That's where everything clicked into place. Everything made sense. It made sense why my dad, right, told me to keep it a secret. It made sense why my dad slammed the car door shut when I said it makes sense. It made sense why my dad became an alcoholic, because he was living in silence, and alcohol became a coping mechanism for him to deal with the abuse. And this is the thing, when you live in silence, right, it reinforces the isolation of abuse, and it sends you down a path where those wounds, right, that you aren't healing turn into something a lot worse. So then it became my mission, my purpose, to get out there, share my story, and help other survivors break their silence too. So 2 years ago, I took to TikTok, right? Now, at the time, TikTok was just kids and teenagers doing like dancing videos and they're singing. Perry Powell comes along and is like, I'm going to disrupt that, right? Because I need to talk to these kids. I need to talk to these teenagers because they're the ones going through it or very recently have come out of it. So I put my story up on TikTok, 250,000 views. I put the story of my dad about living and dying in silence, 6 million views. And I went viral on TikTok. And I got 125,000 followers. And I would get anywhere between 5 and 20 messages every single day on Instagram from kids, from teenagers, telling me about their uncle raping them, telling me about their mum abusing them, right? And that, it made me realize two things. It made me first realize just how rife sexual abuse is within families, right? And it's the silence and it's the secrecy of that abuse that tears the family down. It's not necessarily, there's a quote that's like, when a thief robs a house, it's not what they take, it's what they leave behind, right? And it's that silence that rips the families down. And not only that, it made me realize why these kids reaching out to me and sharing with me, who they don't know me, but they're sharing with me their story. And it made me realize the power of sharing our stories. And that is why the meat and the juice of this talk right now with you guys is about me simply sharing my story, because it gives you the permission to share your story too. It makes you realize who's living in silence, that you're not the only one living in silence. You're not the only one who went through you went through. And when you do break that silence, people are not going to laugh at you. They're not going to outcast you. They're going to love you and welcome you with open arms. And that's what I want to get onto right now towards the end of this talk, about the ways that you can break your silence. Now, I'm fully aware, right, that if you're living in silence, the thought of telling somebody keeps you in silence, right? And I know that for me, I took that route. I told my girlfriend at the time, but I'm fully aware that that's not the case for a lot of people. And here's what I want to tell you guys is that the most important thing is that you breaking the silence to yourself first, before anybody else. Everybody else, they don't exist. Forget about them. Nobody exists on the planet other than you. And it's about you owning your story, confronting your story, and breaking your silence to yourself. Now, there's an example that I give. We see paintings, right? And you know, if you see, we've all seen this type of painting where it's a canvas and it just looks like the artists have got paintbrush into the paint pot and they've splattered it onto the canvas, right? And it's like a £500,000 price tag. And you have some people, it's like, what is this? Give me a paintbrush, give me some paint, I can do that, right? But how do you not know that that artist was living in silence for 18 years? And the way that they just broke that silence was through the piece of artwork that me and you and everybody else in the world is viewing, right? And here's the thing, you could write a song that explains what you went through using the emotions. You can choreograph a dance piece, right? You can choreograph a dance that projects how you've been feeling trapped in silence for so many years. You could clay mold, you could knit. Now that sounds a bit bizarre, but it's about the emotions that you're projecting into the craft of knitting something or clay molding something. So then you have something that's there, right? You have something. Like, I've got a glass of water here, right? Imagine there's no water in it, it's just a glass. But you just made that glass, and you know that when you look at that, you made that. That is how you broke your silence to yourself, right? You could go to a boxing gym, you could let out your emotions that are trapped within you onto that punching bag. Another one is telling yourself in the mirror. No one can hear you in that mirror and telling you, because there's great power when you can project these words out into the universe, because it gives you control over what happened rather than it controlling you. Now, do you see where I'm going with this? Because it's about moving you one step along. Whereas right now you think the first step is telling somebody, that's like climbing Mount Everest without doing any prior hiking. You can't climb Mount Everest on your first attempt. How about you telling somebody who comes point number 5, 10, 50, or 100? Then it becomes a lot easier for you to do that. It becomes a lot easier because you're in a completely different place. Right? Now, I do want to say that I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not trying to be one, right? We leave that to the pros. I believe everybody on the planet should have a therapist. You don't need to have problems to have a therapy. You don't need to just be a survivor of sexual abuse. Everybody should have a therapist, right? So we'll leave that to the pros. But me, I'm just simply a survivor of sexual abuse trying to help other people break their silence too. Because I truly believe that the consequences of living in silence far outweigh the consequences of breaking your silence. And if you've been here to listen to my talk today, then you know that I know that firsthand. Because I truly believe that the more survivors that break their silence, the fewer cases of sexual abuse there will be. And this is a global effort. And we will do this. Thank you.